Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend some time today talking about True Love Waits and the True Love Project. If you've ever listened to this program in the past, you know that oftentimes we've talked about this phenomenon known as True Love Waits. Started 20 years ago, really in one church, spread around the world. When I've spoken on this subject, or even in some of the chapters in my books addressing such issues as sexual ethics, I always talk about the phenomenon of True Love Waits. I was just in Europe recently talking about the subject of abstinence and sex issues and things of that nature, and use that as an example. Well, we want to today really expose you to a project that I think you will find very helpful in your small group, in your church, in your youth group, and I hope that you, as we go through this today, might want to join us a little bit later, talk about your own testimony as you talk about, and we talk about purity and abstinence. Love to hear your comments about that as well. And to guide us through this conversation in the first hour today, we go to Clayton King. He started Clayton King Ministries back in 1995, has traveled to 38 countries, 45 states, speaks in churches all the time. He's the president of Crossroads Youth Camps, as well as the teaching pastor at New Spring Church in South Carolina. He's also a distinguished professor of evangelism at Anderson University. He and his wife, Sherry, are the host of this video project we're going to be talking about. And Clayton, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me on the air. I'm really excited about this conversation.
I am too, and I really want to expose as many of our listeners to this. And I have in front of me here, as people maybe want to watch online, since we do have video cameras in here, they will see the small group leader kit, and we have a DVD, we have a leader's guide, we have student guides, we have True Love Waits commitment cards, we have flyers. You can see some of those on the table, and we'll encourage individuals to find out more. We've also posted a video by you that is a nice kind of promo, as well as an article about the True Love Project. So lots to talk about today, but let's just go back in history for just a little bit. I know that we have a lot of younger listeners who maybe weren't even around 20 years ago when this began. And so talk about how this phenomenon, which really essentially started in one church, right, not far from where we're broadcasting today, and spread all over the nation and literally all over the world.
Yeah, you know, phenomenon is an accurate word to use to describe what God has been doing through the True Love Waits movement. It did begin 20 years ago. It started in a small local church, and it just blossomed and grew until it really was a worldwide phenomenon. For anyone who is not familiar, True Love Waits was and still remains to this day a sexual purity message. And what we're trying to accomplish through this is to simply say to folks, your body matters. What you do with your body really does affect your future. And if something as important as the human body and human connection through sexuality and marriage, if it's important to us, then God himself has something to say about it, because we believe that we're made in God's image. We're his image bearers. We believe that sexuality is something that God thought up, therefore it's a good thing. Now, it can be abused and it can cause great suffering and great harm, but we believe that God has given us instructions in his word to help us miss some of that heartache and some of that emotional and physical and spiritual pain and regret. So True Love Waits did begin 2 decades ago. I was a sophomore in college when it first started, and I was actually speaking at these True Love Waits rallies that were taking place all across America. And even though I had made a commitment to Christ at age 14 to remain sexually pure, since True Love Waits didn't exist at that time, ironically enough, I didn't make the True Love Waits commitment officially on the card until I was actually speaking at a True Love Waits rally myself. And I thought, I should probably at least jump through this hoop and make it official.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute. We're talking with Clayton King, and by the way, we have a very nice video. It's only about a minute and a half long, and one of the things we always encourage you to do, watch the video, then might maybe hit a like button, hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page or your blog. You'll educate other people about the True Love Project, and we also have an article that came out recently about the True Love Project. But just before we move from history to present, I had one other thought in mind, Clayton, and that is back 20 years ago, we were primarily focusing on the issue of abstinence, and purity, of course, went along with it, but now we're going to be talking about purity in terms of the internet and pornography. Now, I'm not saying that pornography wasn't around 40 or 20 years ago or whenever it might be. Certainly, we've always had pornography, but it was a lot less accessible 20 years ago, and now, as I've seen some of the interviews you've done on the DVD, you spend a fair amount of time talking about the fact that we're not just talking about abstinence or virginity, we're talking about sexual purity, not only with our bodies, but with our eyes. Aren't we talking about that too?
Correct. And, this day and age is unlike any that the human race has ever seen in our history. When I was a kid, of course there was porn, but you had to go to a friend's house, and they had to have magazines that they had stolen from their older brother or their dad, or somebody had to get in the car, drive to a video store, and rent a VCR cassette. Now, if you have a smartphone, if you have a laptop, if you have an iPad, if you have any type of device that can connect to the internet or even a cell phone tower, within seconds you have access not just to pictures of people with their clothes off, but you have access to unspeakable filth that nobody should ever see. And so the day that we live in now is charged, it's supercharged with access to things that can literally reformat and rewire a young man or a young woman's brain.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we talk about in True Love Project, is how God has designed the human body, both chemically and mentally, to work. And so it's so important at this day and time that teenagers and young adults are given the tools to combat the temptation that they're going to be faced with every single day, to click onto a website or to hit a link in an email or to simply go on with a friend and just innocently, as an 11 or 12-year-old kid, as innocent as they could possibly be, and then, God forbid, to see something that could literally change the trajectory of their life and their sexual development. So True Love Project does more than just talk about abstinence and virginity. It also talks about a more holistic view of sexual health, of healthy sexuality, rather, so that we understand what we see with our eyes and what we do with our bodies makes us who we are, and it affects us either positively or negatively.
Let me again just mention, just before we go to a break here, and we'll come back and get more into the details of what we're talking about. The True Love Project really is a package that provides you with a lot of information. First of all, I mentioned the DVD, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. But interviews with kind of a who's who of individuals that have really thought this through. Mark Battison, for example, the circle maker and prayer and those kinds of things. Derwin Gray, we've been on the program with him before, kind of one of the leading apologists in the African-American community. Jefferson Bethke, and you go on and on and on. Just a lot of individuals that you would want to hear from. And so 8 different sessions that they have put together, as well as an introductory session, then a workbook for students and a leader's guide for others. If you want to use this in the training and teaching in your own church, maybe in your own family, certainly in community groups, these are great resources that we certainly want to commend to you. And we're going to encourage you to go to the website for True Love Project. They'll handle all of that there. And we want to encourage you to take the time to learn a little bit more about that and really begin to help individuals understand how the gospel defines your purity. So we'll continue our conversation with Clayton King, but a little bit later I want to open up the phones. I suspect some of you have a testimony about True Love Waits, or maybe you've already used the True Love Project. We'd love to hear from you as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Clayton King right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Are there certain careers that Christians should avoid? In the past, that list might include jobs that would require you to engage in a practice that was illegal or immoral. A recent AFA Action blog post reminds us that there are other common careers Christians might not choose because of homosexual activism. Photography used to be a career Christians would pursue. Some might reconsider after a Christian photographer in New Mexico was fined for declining to photograph a lesbian commitment ceremony. What about being a baker? Well, a Christian baker in Oregon is facing both civil and criminal penalties, including jail time, for declining to bake a cake for a gay wedding ceremony. Her business is closed. Would you like to be a florist? Well, an attorney general in Washington is suing a Christian florist who declined to prepare an arrangement for a gay wedding ceremony. You might be interested in serving people in the hospitality arena, but you might want to reconsider being an innkeeper. The Wildflower Inn in Vermont was fined $30,000 and forced to shut down its wedding reception business after declining to host a lesbian ceremony. How about a career in counseling? One student was dismissed from a counseling program at Augusta State University for her religious reservations about the homosexual lifestyle. Want to be a teacher? Well, one student was kicked out of the doctoral program in education at Roosevelt University for expressing in class her belief that homosexuals aren't born gay. You know, these stories and many other stories illustrate how gay activists have been working to intimidate and marginalize Christians. In many cases, these were deliberate attempts by activists to force Christians to compromise their beliefs or else pay a penalty for their beliefs. We still enjoy a great deal of religious freedom, especially in other states where this intimidation hasn't been successful. But these stories remind us of how gay activists are working in education and business to advance their agenda. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Our topic today, sexual purity and abstinence. And if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones in just a few minutes. Clayton with us today as we are talking about this very important issue. Clayton King, as we talk about True Love Project, how the gospel defines your purity. And Clayton, you know, I sit on the board of one organization that goes into the public schools and teaches on abstinence, and I used to sit on a second board that did that. And certainly there are some very compelling arguments we can use even in a secular realm about the fact that really the only true safe sex is abstinence, and we can certainly talk about some of the dangers of STDs and the rest. But the goal of the True Love Project is to connect God's story with your story, the gospel with purity, and that is a more powerful and certainly more effective way to communicate these ideas. And I think your project has done a very good job of connecting those two in ways that sometimes churches have failed to really do in an effective way.
Well, thank you for that compliment. We definitely set out to achieve that goal. One of the things that I'd noticed over the years, before I was even invited to relaunch True Love Waits under the True Love Project name, as an evangelist and as an itinerant speaker, and also as a guy who did 20 years worth of public school assemblies, I noticed that the statistics and the stories and the scare tactics that I often used would usually motivate a teenager for a few weeks, a few months, and if you're really lucky, a few years to stay sexually abstinent. But eventually, if a person doesn't understand the purpose of sex and the meaning behind what we do with our human bodies, eventually that desire that we're born with, that innate creative side of us that wants to procreate, that wants to experience human intimacy, it's going to win out. And so what we try to do with True Love Project, instead of trying to scare people into sexual abstinence, is we try to preach a more robust gospel. We want to go a little bit deeper than just saying, for instance, sex is bad, because this is kind of what I always heard growing up.
And we get the wrong message. Yeah, that sex is bad. And well, no, sex is God's idea. It is good in the right context. Yes.
And those are kind of the two extremes. You have the one crowd that says sex is God, and so I love it, I'm going to do it, and nobody is going to stop me from doing it. Then you've got another side that says sex is gross, and whether that's someone who has unfortunately suffered from any kind of sexual abuse, or maybe even more conservative types like myself who have this attitude, we can't talk about sex, we can't deal with that, we can't expose our children to conversations about that at a young age, sex is gross. But neither one of those extremes is true. Sex is not God, and sex is not gross. Sex is a gift, and it's a gift that God gave us. Therefore, if God gave us the gift of sex, then sex has to be good. So if we understand the good nature of our good God who gave us this gift, then we have a better possibility of understanding how it affects us and how it's supposed to be used in interpersonal relationships, especially in the context of marriage. And so what we try to do is frame the entire conversation in the gospel.
Yes.
It's not abstinence from sex that makes me pure. It's not abstaining from looking at pornography. Just because you can say, I was a virgin on my wedding night, that doesn't necessarily make you pure. What makes us pure is Jesus Christ, who died on the cross in our place and took our sin away from us and offers us his grace and his free gift of salvation. If you start from that perspective and you understand that you are already pure in Christ because of what Jesus has done for you, then it's easier to battle against the sexual temptations because you realize, I don't have to give in to this temptation. A better day is coming when I can enjoy it in the fullness of enjoyment and happiness and joy. And so by God's grace, because I belong to Jesus and I'm already pure, I can say no until the time is right.
Clayton King with us as we talk about the True Love Project, how the gospel defines your purity. Let's take people through a few of the sessions. One of the first sessions I sort of alluded to, God's story, your story. You talk about that with Mark Batterson and some others. And it's really important to have individuals who have their small story understand that it's part of a larger story that God is unfolding in history. True?
It's true. God's big story, really in the book, we say it this way, creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And so when you understand that God created the world with certain ideas about how we should live and how we should interact with each other, and you see that you fit into that story, that your small story is a part of a much bigger and epic story that we all find a place in, then it's easier to find where you fit. So when I see myself as a married man with kids, I realize I'm not just a guy that wants to have sex with a woman. I'm also an image bearer of God. Mm-hmm. I'm also a husband who is called to be friends with my wife. I'm called to love her. I'm also called to live out an example for my little boys who are now ages 8 and 11, so that one of these days when they're old enough to be married, when they're old enough to have their own family, their own children, they will have had an example lived out in front of them that they can emulate and model. So God's big story, if we will allow ourselves to enter into it, can sweep us up into a bigger thing than any of us could ever create on our own. So if a person looks at sex as simply an act that you do on the weekend or one night at a party or a one-night stand, then it cheapens the deep, robust meaning of how God created us to interact with people. God's bigger story says that I'm an image bearer of God, and even when I mess up, it doesn't mean I give up. God gives me second chances, third chances, fourth chances,
sure.
And it's his gospel that really does liberate me to live that way.
Clayton King with us as we talk about the True Love Project. Let's get to one other issue before we take a break, and that is the cost of ownership. If I can quote you back to yourself, you said, before you can understand love, you must understand lordship. Before you decide who you will love, you must decide who is your Lord. And so a very important part of that is understanding that God owns it all, including God owns you.
Yeah, this is such an important part of the discussion that I think sometimes we tend to leave out in the church, and I'm guilty of this as well, and that is as a Christian, I don't have the right to decide what I'm going to do with my body. Because when I became a follower of Jesus Christ, I submitted myself to his lordship. And I submitted my body, my thoughts, my interactions with people. And so before you decide who you're going to love, who you're going to marry, who you're going to spend your life with, you need to settle on a much more important issue. And this is kind of backwards when you think about American culture, because in American culture, the most important issues are how will you be happy? How will you be fulfilled as an individual? How can you get the maximum level of enjoyment out of life? But the gospel says none of those issues are more important than the main issue, which is settling on who is your Lord. Now, if I am my own boss and my own master, then I can do whatever I want to do, and if happiness is my goal, then I will achieve that happiness at any cost, but then I'll pay a price for it. If, however, I decide that Jesus Christ is my Lord, then that means he calls the shots. He makes the decisions, he sets the rules, and he doesn't do those things to hurt me. He does those things to help me. God's rules are not put there to punish us. They are put there so that we can thrive in life, so that we can live an abundant and joy-filled life. So before I decide who I'm going to love, I have to answer the question, who is Lord? And if Jesus is my Lord, then it is a joy for me to submit to him, not as a slave would submit to a master, but submitting to his wisdom, knowing that if I do what God wants me to do, I'm actually going to be happier and filled with more joy than if I did things my own way. And that really is the way sin fascinates us before it assassinates us. Temptation says, if you do this, you'll feel great. Well, that's only a half-truth. You will feel great while you're having sex for a few minutes. But the minute it's over, you're filled with regret, you're filled with shame, and you wish you could go back and change it. What God says is, if you'll do things my way, I'm not going to promise you a perfect life, but I'm going to promise you a relationship with me and my presence in your life, which will supersede all other pursuits.
Talking with Clayton King. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'd like to open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. We have much more to cover in the True Love Project, and as a matter of fact, certainly that particular guide has very good questions, as we were talking about lordship, for example, asking questions if indeed Jesus is the Lord of your life. That should affect who you date, maybe what you watch on television and the internet, conversations we've had before with our friends at Pure Hope Ministries and others, and what you fantasize about and how it affects your perspective on sexual intimacy. And there are just a lot of very practical ideas and very helpful scripture verses and principles in this project. And we wanted to let you know that it exists. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, and you can click on a number of buttons. One, we have an article about the True Love Project that has come out. We have a link to the True Love Project, or you can just go to lifeway.com and find it there. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we also have a video. It's one that I would encourage you to watch. It's only going to take you about 90 seconds. And then you might want to hit the share button and put it on your Facebook page, or if you have a blog, put it there. Maybe if you know somebody that would want to watch that or know about this, you could send it to them by email so that you can really expand the reach of our conversation that we're having today here on Point of View. And if you'd like to join our conversation, perhaps you have a testimony. Maybe it's a very negative testimony. You can remain anonymous if you'd like. I would want to give you that opportunity to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Love to hear some stories of victory, too. I suspect many of you in the listening audience either have been a part of True Love Waits. Maybe your children or grandchildren have. Love to hear your stories as well. We'll continue our conversation with Clayton King and the True Love Project right after these important messages.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today about the True Love Project. Clayton King with us, and if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I mentioned the video, which I would encourage you maybe to hit the share button and send it out to your blog or your Facebook page. Also, you might want to tweet something. There is a special hashtag. It's hashtag True Love Project. And again, hashtag True Love Project, and that could be a tweet or something on your Facebook status that might educate others and expose more people to what I think is a great opportunity for people to learn how the gospel defines your purity. Let's, before we get back to the book, take at least one phone call. We'll take some calls along the way. 1-800-351-1212. In Georgia, Antoine, you're on with Clayton King.
Yes, how you doing, Kerby?
Very good. Thank you for calling.
I just have a comment. I was listening to you, what you were saying about like some people say sex is gross and some people say sex is good. Me and my wife, we just had our talk with our 11-year-old daughter. She's about to start middle school.
Sure.
So she kind of said that, but we backed it up with scripture, going back to Genesis, with Adam and Eve and things like that. And, I just like to say, you guys are right. It's sex. It's good when you do it, when you practice it the right way, long as it's biblical, and, when you're married, because, I mean, it says in the Bible, I forgot the scripture, but it says sex doesn't defile the.
Sure, we're going to get to a couple of those verses in just a minute. So you're setting me up for my next set of questions. Perfect.
Yeah, he's talking about the passage in Hebrews. It said the marriage bed should be kept pure and undefiled, and that's one of the things that we really hit on in the chapter where we talk about the way God has wired the human brain and the human body. And in Hebrews, when the writer of Hebrews says that the marriage bed should be kept undefiled, it literally means bringing no foreign object into the sanctity of the marriage bed. And it's referring to the memories that people bring in from other sexual partners. Now, in no way, shape, or form are we trying to make someone feel bad if they've messed up in their previous relationships. But what we're trying to do is warn somebody who has not yet begun to experiment sexually. If you do this, the physiology and the science behind how God has wired the human body and the human brain requires that you will bring those memories with you for the rest of your life. And so what we say is, if you haven't already messed up, don't. Right. Trust God. Keep that brain pure so that marriage bed can be undefiled when you arrive there one day.
Antoine, appreciate your call today. Let's, if we can, just real quickly, maybe just before we get into some more in your book, we know a lot more about the brain than we did even a few decades ago. We recognize that, first of all, the brain is much more plastic. One of the key words is neuroplasticity, is a big word for saying that you can really change the neural pathways. That doesn't sound good if you're going to be watching pornography or getting involved sexually. We recognize how these sexual images as well as sexual experiences are imprinted on the brain with brain hormones. So we now know the wisdom of what Scripture has been teaching us for millennia, but now science backs up some of those principles that we've always held dear as biblical principles.
Yeah, it's true. God knew what he was doing when he made us, and God loved us enough to give us some warnings. Turns out God was right. Go figure. The bottom line on that is that science is now proving what the Bible has been telling us all along. And one of the most interesting things that my wife and I discovered as we were writing this book is that when God made the human body, both male and female, he made us very similar but extremely different. And anybody who's been married for more than 5 minutes knows that male and female are completely different. Parents with both gender of children know that male and female are very different. But the male and the female bodies even have different chemicals. We share adrenaline and we share endorphins. But for males and females, we have two different chemicals, oxytocin and vasopressin.
Yes.
And those two chemicals themselves are as different as night and day when it comes to how a guy and a girl feel after sexual intercourse, or how they even connect with each other emotionally during the dating phase, during the mating phase. It is absolutely undeniable that the way God has wired us to work, it just cannot be undone. So you can either fight against it and suffer the consequences, or you can adhere to it and you can believe that God knows best and God is smart.
You know, we've talked with a couple of experts about this, especially oxytocin. It has answered a question. I remember when I first started reading about this in some of these books that came out about why you can sometimes see, and we've all seen it, a girl that is got an abusive boyfriend. He's kind of a real jerk, and you're just going, why doesn't she just dump him? Well, when you're in the midst of sexual activity, that oxytocin pumps through her body. It's the binding hormone. It's something that makes mothers take care of children even in the midst of very dire circumstances. It's what causes women to be very close to a man. But in those teen years, it finally answered the question I think we've all had, because we all know in high school and in college, we'd see this girl and she kept sticking with this guy, and you're going, what is wrong with her? Well, it's because the hormones are telling her to continue to keep close and to bind with and to be intimate with that individual, even though her brain is probably telling her it's time to get out of there.
That's right. They call it the bonding molecule, and it's the same exact hormone, it's the same exact chemical compound, as you mentioned, that makes a mother decide to have a second child after her first child caused her so much pain.
Yes.
It literally makes a woman forget the pain. That's why sometimes women have I've seen interviews on TV about this, I've read this in different books, a woman even would stay with a man that physically abuses her, because this chemical will make them believe the best about a guy, even if that guy is the worst guy that she's ever been around.
Well, certainly you brought some more to the table today. Antoine was also, I think, implying, as he was talking about this, another verse that relates to session 4, your heart matters, and that's where Jesus says, from within, out of a people's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, promiscuity, stinginess, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness. All of these evil things come from within and defile a person. So it gets us back to this very important principle. Your heart really does matter.
The heart not only matters, but it matters above all things. You know, Proverbs 4:23 says,
yes,
above all, above your body, above your mind, above your thoughts, above everything that you have, guard your heart, because it is the wellspring of life. And Jesus touches on that when he says, don't even look at a woman lustfully, or you've committed adultery with her in your heart. This is why it's so important for us to make Jesus the Lord of our life and to give him first place in our heart, because the heart is really where all sin begins. And ironically, the Bible tells us that the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things, and no one can know it. And so the bad advice that I've heard my whole life growing up in American culture is simply this: just trust your heart. Just go with your heart. But we say in True Love Project, do not trust your heart. Trust God's word and God's heart for you. Because if we trusted our heart, then we would go on shooting rampages every time we get angry.
Wow.
I would curse people out on the telephone if they got my order wrong. I mean, this happened to me just yesterday on the phone with a telephone company. They got my bill wrong again. My heart was so angry at the ineptitude of that person, but I can't just go with my heart in that moment, because if I did, I would be in big trouble. The same thing is true, even more so, when it comes to love, relationships, and sexuality, because we all have the propensity to be sexual sinners. We're all sinners in God's eyes. If I wanted, in a moment, in a lustful thought, if I wanted to have sex with another woman, am I supposed to follow my heart and go ahead and take that away from her? We call that rape in America. So we cannot trust our heart unless Jesus Christ lives there, and unless his Spirit is transforming our heart into the image of Christ.
And of course, we're also implying that you have to have a heart that is renewed by the Holy Spirit, because Jeremiah 17 tells us that the heart is deceitful more than anything else. So we're going to come back and take some more phone calls as we continue our conversation today with Clayton King. And if you just joined us, talking about the True Love Project, how the gospel defines your purity, we have some great opportunities for you to find out a little bit more about the conversation we're having today. First of all, you can go back and hit the podcast button and listen to it again. You can also, of course, watch the video, and we would encourage you to share that with others. Perhaps you would like to post a Twitter tweet, and it's hashtag True Love Project. There are some ways in which you can educate others about this, but most importantly, we encourage you to find some more information, and this would be a great opportunity for a small group. But even as Antoine was talking about sharing with his own daughter, this is something that is not that expensive. You could even have it in your own home and use that to educate your children, and then pass it on to others to effectively use it. So if you are not familiar with the True Love Project, take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can go to lifeway.com and see their resources there. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just a few more minutes with Clayton King as we talk about the True Love Project. And I thought for our younger listeners, we might just remind us how things have changed so dramatically. So let's head out to Rhode Island, WARV. And Helen, I think you wanted to share a story from your past that might put some of this in perspective. So go for it.
That's right. It's kind of a long past. I got out of high school in 1947, and the office where I worked, one day, the young man, because I worked for 3 generations, and this young fella, he'd already done his time in the Navy, and he was talking to one of the salesmen in the office, and a word came up. I don't even know how they might have brought that topic up, but Kent, the young fella out of the Navy, went to the dictionary to see what that word meant, and the word was pornography. And
So he had been in the Navy, and he not exposed to pornography. Here's the word, and has to look it up in a dictionary to know what it means.
But it shows. I'll say so often to people, this isn't the world I grew up in.
That's for sure.
But after Kent said, "Wow," now I might have been about 22. I thought, I guess I'll go over and see what the word means.
It's such a delightful story. Clayton, I just had to bring this one on because I could hear you laughing. I was thinking as soon as I saw on the screen, we got to tell the story, because there was a time in which pornography, do you need a needle and stylus? Is that like a phonograph? I mean, that honestly was not top of the mind for people decades ago, almost a century ago, and yet now, today, every young person unfortunately encounters it, sometimes accidentally, on their Facebook page or in the internet, or they get an email or something that causes them to have their life change dramatically.
Oh, yeah, and you know what, it objectifies. I used to say it objectifies women, but now I realize it objectifies everyone. Both the person that poses for the photographs or the videos, the person that records it or takes those pictures, the person that builds the website, that puts those images on there, and then the young men and women, the old men and women who look at that. Pornography cheapens human life. It objectifies whoever is watching it and participating in it, as well as the person that is being watched. And it's so bad now that whenever someone asks me as a minister, what's the one piece of advice you would give me, especially for a guy? This happened to me Sunday at a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He said, what's the one piece of advice you would give me as a 21-year-old young man that feels God calling me in a ministry? I immediately said, don't ever start looking at porn.
You're right.
Because it will so radically change the development of your brain and your body. It creates all sorts of confusion about what sex is supposed to be and the purpose of it, and it numbs people to the realities of life. When GQ magazine comes out and publicly states that men should stop looking at porn, you know it's a problem, and that recently happened. So that's a big part of what we do with True Love Project. We don't just say don't look at porn, though. We talk about how you can have a plan to combat it, and it really boils down to 3 words: hate it, starve it, outsmart it.
Yes.
You've got to hate the sin, you've got to starve the sin, and you've got to be smarter than the sin and have a plan so that you don't get sucked into it.
Well, and that is 7th session. You hate it, starve it, outsmart it. Again, you say you will never win the battle with sin by just trying harder. Effort alone is not enough. Sin is stronger and more experienced than you, and like a serial killer, it will not settle for anything other than the complete taking of your life. If you want to defeat sin and temptation, you have to have a better plan, one capable of a multifaceted attack. So talk a little bit, for just a few minutes we have remaining, how individuals can hate it, starve it, outsmart it, because they have to make some deliberate choices. You already alluded to one, and that is to guard your heart and your eyes. What else can we and should we do?
It is very deliberate. You have to be very intentional to say, because I belong to Jesus, because my body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, I will guard what I allow to affect my body. And the plan can really include dozens of different multifaceted attacks. For instance, in the book, I give some practical advice. Put a filtering service on all your devices. Sign up for either XXX Church or Covenant Eyes. So many of these great ministries that will give you a free software service so that anything you log on to sends an email to 3 or 4 or 5 or however many men or women you want to hold you accountable. Have a deal with a brother. Have a deal with a sister. Have a commitment where you say, I promise you that if I am tempted to look at porn, if I am tempted to go out and party and have sex with a random stranger, if I feel the desire or the craving to go back to a sexual relationship that I had before that I know is sinful, it's not a sin to be tempted. So don't feel so bad about being tempted. Make a covenant with a friend and tell them, I promise you, if I am tempted to do that thing, I will call you before I do it. I will at least pick up the phone. I'll send you a text. That way you know I'm struggling. You can pray with me. You can come get me. You can talk me down from the ledge, but I will at least have that accountability. Another thing that I encourage students to do is, especially if your parents are Christians, share your struggles with your parents. If you're a son, let your dad know, Dad, I'm struggling with porn. I'm struggling with desiring this girl. I'm really having a hard time with lust. Dad, I've been going out with this girl, and the last time we went out, she tried to get me to do things with her that I thought were sinful, and everything in my body wanted to take her clothes off and go for it. But because I'm a Christian, I knew it was wrong, and I barely made it out of that situation. Dads also have to be willing to have those conversations with their sons. One of the other things that you can do is to, and I know this is going to sound radical, but don't have internet on your phone. If you are struggling with these kinds of addictions, whether it's even looking at porn or just communicating with somebody that used to be, excuse me for being blunt, but everybody knows what a booty call is. And if you've ever had experience with somebody and you know, if I'm lonely and I need somebody, I can call her up, I can call him up, delete their number. Don't get internet on your phone. Cut off those temptations before they get to you. We've got to get really militant if we're going to protect ourselves from this. See, this is the world that we're living in now. It's not the world that my parents grew up in or like our previous caller grew up in. We have to be absolutely ruthless by God's grace in our fight for purity. We don't do it alone. We do it by His grace, but we have to put forth the effort. And if we do, we can know that when we do mess up, He'll forgive us. But the chances of remaining pure are higher when we have a good battle plan to hate it, starve it, outsmart it.
Clayton King has been with us as we've been talking about the True Love Project. And again, it includes a number of great resources. There's a DVD, there's a 70-page student manual that you can work through, as well as a leader's guide and other great resources that go together. We really encourage you to find out more about this. It's something you could use in your Christian school, it's something you could use in your church. Frankly, it's not that expensive. You could certainly use it in your own home and should do so. So, Clayton, I want to thank you not only for the good work that you and your wife have done, but for the various people that you've interviewed in those 8 different sessions. And thank you for so much dedication to this over these many years. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, this has been a great treat. I hope we can do it again sometime.
We'd love to. True Love Project, you can find more about it by going to the website, pointofview.net. As I mentioned before, we have an article about that, as well as a link to True Love Project, and as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, a video that I would encourage you to watch, and then take the time maybe to share it with others. Hit that share button. That will go to other individuals that need to read about it or watch it. And so, again, some great resources that we wanted to put in your hands. As in this first hour today, we spent some time talking about sexual purity and abstinence, and I hope that you will take the time to visit the website to learn a little bit more. If you'd like to watch this and listen to this again, you can go to the podcast, and actually that is a way that you can do that. Also, of course, we, as you do go to that website, encourage you to get involved. There's a Get Involved button so that if you're not already receiving some of our emails that we send out before the program, educating you about some of these issues, telling you who we'll have on the program, and giving you all the important web links, certainly there is an opportunity for you to sign up for that, as well as for my daily commentary. And, of course, we have a donate button. That's a way in which you can support this ministry. And if you appreciate the kind of conversations we have here so often, today as we talk about sexual purity and abstinence, please click on the button that says donate and help us out. True Love Project, How the Gospel Defines Your Purity. I thought you'd like to know more about it. It's a great resource. We hope we can put it in your hands. Let's take a break, and in our second hour, we'll get into some other very important issues that you need to know about. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-3776. 5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Jesus, I love you, how I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you. Jesus, I love you, how I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to be talking about the subject of global poverty. That is a conversation we've had in the past with people like Dale Hansen Burke, author of The Skeptic's Guide to Global Poverty. We've also, of course, talked with Wayne Grudem, The Poverty of Nations, a Sustainable Solution. We're going to focus today on a new book that I think would be very helpful to you to understand what you can and should be doing, both as an individual, maybe through your community, through your church. Hope Rising, How Christians Can End Extreme Poverty in This Generation. It is written by Dr. Scott Todd. He is the Senior Vice President for Global Advocacy at Compassion International, individual that has held a number of posts, including the Director of Compassion's HIV/AIDS Initiative, and he has been involved for quite some time in this issue and writes very persuasively and effectively about this issue. So, Dr. Todd, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's great to be with you.
One of the things that we encourage people to do is recognize that they can have an individual responsibility. My wife and I, for example, have sponsored children through World Vision and through Compassion International, and that's just an action item right off the bat that I hope people will consider. But the real premise of your book is that we can end extreme poverty in this generation. The idea is that we will never get rid of all the poverty, but some of the extreme poverty that has been such a part of the third and so-called fourth world countries could come to an end if we're willing to take some deliberate steps. True?
Absolutely true. And a lot of people would be very skeptical about that claim.
Yes.
And we know, we've asked folks, do you believe this is possible? There have been official surveys that show about 70% of Americans in general, and whether they're Christian or not doesn't seem to change it, about 70% don't believe that claim. But then about 90% of them don't know about the astonishing evidence of progress and the pace of change and the fact that we are well on our way to achieving that goal.
We've talked a little bit about that with Wayne Grudem, just the idea of a free market capitalism, some of the barriers coming down, so all sorts of entrepreneurial activities. We've talked with other guests about the idea of microfinancing and those kinds of things. There are some very significant signs. And so really I'm hoping in this hour to maybe convince people, maybe we won't move it from 70% to 3%, but maybe we can move it from 70% at least to 60 to 50%, because there are some really encouraging signs that I certainly talk about in the book.
Yeah, it's exciting, and really the point of this message is to encourage folks like yourself. You mentioned sponsoring a child. That may seem like a small act. I've been sponsoring Children with Compassion for 26 years now, and I've studied the program in depth, and what you begin to realize is that those small actions, which for any of us individually might not seem like much, have an enormous cumulative power. And so there are changes happening in individual Christian generosity engagement, whether it's microfinance, things that you just described, or sponsoring a child, or, as you also described, the business sector, the changes in policy that allow, leverage globalization in positive ways. So all of that comes together. Really, it's all about people. When you talk about ending extreme poverty, you're talking about creating opportunities and freedom for development for people. And we certainly believe the most of that impact in people development happens during childhood. So that act it's easy to underestimate the significance of that simple act of sponsoring a child.
Well, and also let's talk about one other thing, because it leads to your first chapter, and that is that the technology that we have today, the information technology, allows us to, in a sense, kind of joint venture on the cyberspace realm and bring people together. And you start off with a story that is very familiar to all of our listeners. It was written quite a long time ago, called The Star Thrower, and I think everybody's heard the story. A man's walking along the beach, sees this little boy taking a starfish and throwing it into the ocean, and there's just all these starfish out here, and he finally says, "Son, don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish? You can't make a difference." And the child takes another starfish and throws it back and said, "I made a difference for that one." Okay, we all know that story. That's been repeated at almost ad nauseum by Christians over the years. But then you say, if you go to the 21st century, you have come up with a different mindset, how we could use some of these technologies, Twitter, Facebook, and others, to get more people, in this case, onto the beach, throwing starfish back into the ocean.
Right, and recognizing that while individual action and individual result is fundamental, it's important, and it's what you're doing, it's what I'm doing, but there is something that changes when you have a whole social movement, and that's really what we're seeing. We know, for example, that 90% of Christians say they are concerned about extreme poverty, so that's good to know. At least some level of concern for 90% of us. About half of us actually act on that concern and give some kind of donation somewhere. About half of us do that. What very few of us realize is that it's getting better. And that's where I said earlier, 90% of us, when we're asked, is it getting better? For example, the specific question was, has the percentage of people living in extreme global poverty increased, stayed about the same, or decreased since 1990? And about 90% of us get that answer wrong. Same question, the number of children dying every day from poverty-related causes, increased, stay about the same, or decreased since 1990. Most of us, in that case about 80%, say things are getting worse. And in fact, in both cases, things are getting better, and not just in a minor way. For example, in 1981, 52% of the world's population, half the planet, lived in extreme economic poverty. That's life on less than $1.25 per day.
Right.
So 52% in 1981, we're down to 21% today. So we've already cut by more than half the percentage of people living in extreme economic poverty. If we were still at 51%, 52, we'd have 2 billion additional people in that state of economic poverty. Same thing with child mortality. We used to have 40,000 children dying every day from hunger and preventable disease. Today we're down to 18,000. Now that's still 18,000 too many, but we have to look back and celebrate the progress. We have to say, wow, we have seen extreme poverty cut in half, more than half, in the span of a generation. It was a 31-point drop. We have 21 to go. So folks, when they hear that, they're astonished. And it's not just new data. It's actually data that's been around for a while, and it surprises me. I mean, as shocking as that evidence of progress is, it's even more shocking to me that nobody seems to know. And so really the message is to encourage folks to say, it's getting better, what you're doing matters, this is a winnable battle. Now, we want to attack that, as I really value the point of view conversations that you create, because we need to attack that from the mindset theologically, from a kind of a biblical worldview. We need to attack it sociologically. What is the right thing in society? What's the role of business, the role of government, the role of individual philanthropy? And we need to understand it at a personal level from our walk with God and our living out of our faith. What kind of expectations do we have here? What is our hope for the future for the extreme poor?
Talking with Dr. Scott Todd, and we will continue our conversation after the break. We'll talk a little bit about some of the tyranny of low expectations. We're going to talk about the fact, as we've already alluded to, that poverty is not this unconquerable mystery, and then what kind of people will end extreme poverty and look a little bit more at what kind of change we can actually enact in this generation. So some great information that I think might be new to all of you. As the surveys show, we have a lot of individuals that think things are getting worse. In this particular area, they're getting better. We are not there yet, but we certainly encourage you to consider what you might do individually, what you might do collectively with other believers and within your church to make a difference. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Scott Todd right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Are there certain careers that Christians should avoid? In the past, that list might include jobs that would require you to engage in a practice that was illegal or immoral. A recent AFA Action blog post reminds us that there are other common careers Christians might not choose because of homosexual activism. Photography used to be a career Christians would pursue. Some might reconsider after a Christian photographer in New Mexico was fined for declining to photograph a lesbian commitment ceremony. What about being a baker? Well, a Christian baker in Oregon is facing both civil and criminal penalties, including jail time, for declining to bake a cake for a gay wedding ceremony. Her business is closed. Would you like to be a florist? Well, an attorney general in Washington is suing a Christian florist who declined to prepare an arrangement for a gay wedding ceremony. You might be interested in serving people in the hospitality arena, but you might want to reconsider being an innkeeper. The Wildflower Inn in Vermont was fined $30,000 and forced to shut down its wedding reception business after declining to host a lesbian ceremony. How about a career in counseling? One student was dismissed from a counseling program at Augusta State University for her religious reservations about the homosexual lifestyle. Want to be a teacher? Well, one student was kicked out of the doctoral program in education at Roosevelt University for expressing in class her belief that homosexuals aren't born gay. You know, these stories and many other stories illustrate how gay activists have been working to intimidate and marginalize Christians. In many cases, these were deliberate attempts by activists to force Christians to compromise their beliefs or else pay a penalty for their beliefs. We still enjoy a great deal of religious freedom, especially in other states where this intimidation hasn't been successful. But these stories remind us of how gay activists are working in education and business to advance their agenda. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Scott Todd with us today as we talk about this very important issue, Hope Rising, how Christians can end extreme poverty in this generation. He is with Compassion International and certainly has been looking at some of these numbers. And just before we talk about some of the very important reasons why individuals are poor and dealing with extreme poverty, I thought I'd come back to the point that you made a minute ago, what you call in your chapter, overthrowing the tyranny of low expectations. If indeed you are convinced that things are getting worse, you feel like it's hopeless. It's an intractable problem that we can't solve. But as you said, we used to say that 40,000 children die each day from preventable causes. Now it's down to 18,000, which is still too much, but it shows very significant progress. And one of the others that struck me was every day, this is every single day, there are 20,000 fewer children dying of preventable causes. That's happening every single day. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, in which eventually that would not be a big issue in many of the countries in the world where you would have massive number of children dying from preventable diseases.
Yeah, it's so exciting, and I hope that people who've been engaged in this cause can feel encouraged by hearing that and know that it's incredible. We live in an unprecedented time with a possibility of bringing an end to extreme global poverty, and that possibility has not been present ever in the history of humanity. So looking at that reality and beginning to ask ourselves, well, then why do I have so much skepticism about that? Why are my expectations not there, despite the fact that this evidence is so overwhelming? And we've talked about two particular indicators, but there's a lot of data. I mean, it's just overwhelming, the amount of data, so that it's not even really controversial when you really understand the facts to make the claim we will bring an end to extreme global poverty. There are questions, what will be my individual role in that? When my grandchild steps up onto my knee and asks me how I was part of it, what will be my answer? What is the role of government? What is the role of business? How can we actually get this done? The expectations that we have are unjustifiably low, and helping get the word out about the progress, I think, will help people develop a vision. And that's really why we called the book Hope Rising. Hope is not just a fluffy thing. The poet Emily Dickinson once said, hope is a thing with feathers. I completely disagree. Hope is a thing with muscles. Yes. Hope is actually built of three specific materials, and this is true for extreme global poverty. It's true in your personal life, whatever the future is that you're hoping to build. You, number one, have to have a clear vision of that better future. So one component of hope is vision. We were talking about that with low expectations. You can't have that vision if you just expect it to always be this way. So a vision of a better future is number one. Second is a way to get there. A vision of a better future with no way to get there is just wishful thinking, and that's not hope. Real hope has a path, a way to get there. It might be tough, but it has to be there for you. So whatever that future is that you see that you're hoping for, do you have a way to get there? And then the third thing is the guts to try, the courage to take one step on that path and begin working toward that better future. So that's real hope. It's tough. It's substantive. It's what people hold on to when they've been diagnosed with cancer. I've seen it. It's what the kids hold on to when they're trapped in extreme poverty. They have a vision, and they have a way, and they have the courage. That's what they need to climb out of extreme poverty. So that's why the book is titled Hope Rising, and it's about raising expectations and having a vision and showing the way forward. But the courage is going to be up to us.
Great information in the book. And by the way, let me just mention that you can probably find it in your local bookstore. It's part of the Nelson Book series. But if not, we have it available at our Point of View store. It's the first book that we have listed there. We also have a video, Hope Rising, and it's about a minute and a half long. So just watch it. It takes you only about 90 seconds. Then you could hit the share button, maybe put it on your Facebook page or your blog and educate others about that. We have an article that is kind of a short book review of the book. And then we even have a link to hoperisingbook.com so that you can find out more about that as well. So lots of great resources. And Scott, just before we get into some of the different ways in which we can address poverty, you have been a professor of microbiology, and I thought for just a minute, maybe you could explain, as you do in Chapter 9, why kids die, because it's important to understand why we have still children dying of preventable diseases and what needs to take place if we're going to raise this next generation out of extreme poverty. So help us, if you can, maybe give us a little bit of a science lesson here.
Well, I don't know if it'll be much of a science lesson. I mean, the interesting thing here is in my previous career, we were addressing cancer and diseases of the immune system and a certain kind of viruses. Complicated stuff. We needed research to understand their causes. We needed research to help develop new therapies. The issues of extreme global poverty are not that complex, and that's why simple strategies are so effective. Yes. For example, we used to have about 1 million children dying every year from malaria. Well, malaria is a parasite carried by a mosquito, and there's a simple technology called an insecticide-treated net that can cost as little as $5 or $10. If kids sleep under that net, they have a greatly reduced chance of contracting malaria. And so we've actually seen the number of children dying from malaria cut in half since the year 2000. So a 45% reduction in malaria mortality. That's almost all kids under the age of 5, and that's through insecticide-treated nets. It's through spraying to kill mosquitoes in certain places, draining out water. Simple strategies. So that's one example. Another would be vaccine-preventable disease. Measles, believe it or not, we invented a vaccine for measles almost 50 years ago. But still, in the year 2000, we had 750,000 kids die from measles, almost 750,000 kids. But since the year 2000 to today, we've had a 71% drop in the number of children dying from that vaccine-preventable disease simply because we're completing the work of immunizing those kids. Another big cause is waterborne disease. Waterborne disease carries lots of different issues. You know, hygiene and sanitation has been a massive issue. But just since 1990, 2 billion people on this planet have gained access to safe drinking water supplies. Waterborne disease is no longer the leading cause of death for children under the age of 5. So we have lots of kids now living, not just living, but not suffering. So it's not only not dying, but not falling sick. And when they're not sick and they're able to be in school, they're learning and they're growing, and they're becoming the young men and women that they're designed to be. They'll be more likely to pay attention in school when they're not malnourished. And so it's all about human development. It's about taking care of those kids. And when we see all of it, I mean, talk about nutrition, we've seen a tremendous cut in malnutrition rates around the world. I could go on for a long time, but these aren't complicated things. They are things that we have learned and already accomplished in many of our societies, certainly in the United States. And now we're starting to see that final impact on improving the quality of life and the opportunities for kids around the world.
In some respects, we're taking 20th century and even 21st century, but let's just use 20th century technology and applying it to the rest of the world. My grandfather was a doctor, and he dealt with people that had whooping cough and measles and mumps and a variety of other, sometimes cholera and whatever. Now, a doctor in the 21st century in America going to Africa is confronting sometimes some of those same diseases that we've completely eradicated or minimized dramatically, smallpox, whatever you might go down to, in those other countries. So in some respects, we just want to take the technology and the medical advances to those areas. And in some cases, as you point out, they're not even medical advances, just treated malaria nets and mosquito nets are enough to significantly reduce some of those diseases that have ravaged the African continent for millennia.
That's right. It is a lot of the progress that we've seen here. There's spillover effect, there's learning, there's extension of those technologies, or even new inventions, new approaches being created in those countries. It all comes together to produce the kind of results we've been seeing over the past several decades, honestly. And at the same time, in increasing investments in education, better access to information. So there have been rises in democracy, for example. You know, the American experiment that shows the power of democracy to reinvent itself and create a lot of the strengths of our society. We've seen a radical, well, that's probably not the best word, but a wonderful increase in democracies around the world. Well, that flows out of better literacy rates in education and people beginning to understand governance. So it all ties together to say that there are simple things that are working. Let's celebrate the progress, and then let's figure out how to finish this thing, because we can. We're
going to take a break. When we come back, though, I want to talk about Haiti, because you deal with that in one of your chapters, and there is where it's almost been a perfect storm of corruption, of inefficiency, of all sorts of social and economic problems, but then hit with things like earthquakes and the rest that have caused such a problem, and that is a country on our doorstep, and we certainly want to talk about that, but also get into what can government do, what can churches do, what can parachurch organizations and faith-based organizations can do, what can individuals do. And so that is all part of the book, Hope Rising, How Christians Can End Extreme Poverty in This Generation. I hope this has been an encouragement to you and also a reality check on the fact that we may sometimes believe things with a great deal of conviction, but we're wrong. And that is, we have actually had a very significant change, a very positive change in terms of addressing these issues of extreme poverty around the world. And so we want you to consider how we can finish the job. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take some phone calls as well. 1-800-351-1212. And again, if you'd like more information, feel free to visit our website. We have the video, Hope Rising, by Scott Todd. We have a little bit of information about the book. We have a way in which you can order it. And, of course, we have a link to the website for Hope Rising, hoperisingbook.com, all available on our website, pointofview.net. But also, if you'd like to join our conversation today as we talk about global poverty, we'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation today, talking about the book Hope Rising, How Christians Can End Extreme Poverty in This Generation, talking with Dr. Scott Todd. He is the author of that book and also has been an award-winning scientist and serves as the Senior Vice President for Global Advocacy at Compassion International. Let me, if I can, for just a minute, encourage some of you, if you have never sponsored a child, to consider doing so. I know a while back we talked about a World Vision, and some of us around the table wondered if we might maybe decrease the number of children we sponsor through World Vision, increase them with Compassion International because of a policy change they made and then rescinded. But whatever you think you should do, I hope that you will get involved in a very significant way. This is an opportunity for you to be involved in the lives of those children who grow up in extreme poverty. My wife and I have sponsored children for, I guess it's now more than 20 years. It's something that's a very significant encouragement, and it's an opportunity for you to get involved. And we're going to talk about specific solutions, but I wanted to mention that and hope that you will challenge yourself and your family to consider what you might do to address this issue as well. Scott, you said you've sponsored children all these years, and it's a real encouragement to see that eventually those children go on and then we get a new child, and it's a kind of an ongoing process, and it's certainly something I so appreciate about the work of Compassion International.
Yeah, thanks, Kerby. It's been a joy. I've never regretted that decision. For 25-plus years, I've been sponsoring children with compassion. There are big differences between sponsorship organizations, so it is important to look closely and think carefully about that decision. At Compassion, we focus on individual children, providing a holistic program, meaning it's comprehensive in nature. It includes education, it includes health, but it also includes what we call socio-emotional development. It's about safe places to play and keeping them out of gangs, things like that.
Yes.
And then really a unique and critical thing about Compassion's program is that it's always, in all cases, with the 1.5 million children in these programs worldwide, it is done in partnership with local Christian churches. And those kids will have an opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ in a culturally appropriate way, in an age-appropriate way. And many of them make the choice to become Christians as a result of that. It's a core part of our program. And so it not only is a comprehensive program, but also a long-term program. So we begin with a child as early as we can and hope to walk the journey of childhood and adolescence, the sponsor speaking into their lives, encouraging them, sharing Scripture, being prayed for by them, and also praying for them. I've had that experience with dozens of children of compassion and have had the opportunity to meet many of them at their graduations and as they move on into life. And it's truly a joy. And as simple as it sounds, it's easy to underestimate the impact of that. Mm-hmm. We really, again, as I said earlier, believe that poverty is about developing people. Poverty is about people. And the real root issues of poverty are more internal than external. Yes, the circumstances matter. Yes, the environment and context matters. But the harder issues are the internal issues of a person feeling defeated, a person feeling like they're a victim of those circumstances, incapable of making change in their community, a person who has a fatalistic mindset. If that kind of thing happens, usually during the teen years, we've seen it, where little kids are too innocent. They don't know the world's against them. They're just out there, trying to have fun and play and so on. Well, over years of grinding away in the conditions of extreme poverty, the message is, you don't matter, give up, it isn't going to get any better, you can't fix it, your dad was poor, your grandfather was poor, you will be poor, and often exploited by those with power within the community. The essence of Compassion's program is to argue with that lie and to say, no, you do matter, because God loves you, God created you, and you were made in His image. You have unique gifts and talents and abilities, just like you and I. All those kids were made by God for a special purpose, and for helping them to see that and then live out that potential. When they grow up and instead of seeing those challenges in their environment and saying, oh, this is just the way it is, no, they say, that's not right, and I'm going to fix it. That's when you really win the war. You begin to change that internal condition where instead of feeling defeated and fatalistic about all of those realities, they see what we described earlier as hope. It's a solid, strong hope that animates the muscles, that ignites action. That hope, which is composed of those three things, a vision for a better future. It may simply be a kid saying, I have a vision for a well in my community, so I don't have to walk 4 miles to go get the water, right? It may be that simple. What is the vision for that better future? But there has to be a way to get there. Otherwise, that vision's just wishful thinking. So is there a way? Do you see the way to get to that better future? And then the third component is the courage to try. And so that core program, holistic and long-term, walking with kids and helping them understand, let's hear about your vision for a better future. We have a thing called My Plan for Tomorrow. So all the kids in our programs worldwide go through an exercise of describing their plans for the future. Kids that are often trapped in extreme poverty often can't express that. You say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they look at you blankly like, I don't even understand the question.
Yeah.
So helping kids to form a vision, I'm going to grow up. What might I be? They start saying things like teacher or nurse, and it's wonderful. They begin to aspire, to have dreams. But you have to go beyond that and say, well, now let's see, how are you going to get there? Stay in school. Okay, we're going to help you out with tutoring. You don't have money for a uniform, and it's embarrassing to go to school without a uniform. We're going to cover that. So whatever it takes to help provide that child the opportunities, but it's going to be up to that kid to have the courage to take advantage of those opportunities. We'll do our best to protect them and provide opportunities. Unfortunately, not every child's journey is successful, but we have seen so many successful outcomes. And there's even been independent research of Compassion's programs by major academic studies,
yes,
economists that come to us and say, this actually has a stunning success rate. And so it's a wonderful ministry to be a part of, Compassion International. I've always enjoyed it, but the essence of it is hope, and that kind of ties back to what we're talking about with Hope Rising.
Certainly. Just love your enthusiasm, and as I've said before, I think faith-based organizations do have a leg up or an opportunity to make a difference because some of those issues are not solved by economics. They're vision and plan and courage, and certainly the spiritual component, very important. Compassion International certainly dedicated to that as well.
Absolutely.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, I did mention Haiti, and I thought it would be a good example of a country that had a lot of chronic problems, but then an acute problem of the earthquake. And it seems to me that there's a good example, Scott, for just a minute, about what we can do at a governmental level, what we can do in terms of a community or a church, and maybe what we can do as individuals. What would you suggest?
Yeah, so Haiti is a very challenging, as you shared. It's one of those countries that just seems to be constantly plagued, and there are a handful of these. So when we talk about ending extreme global poverty, we're talking about eliminating it as a pandemic that is true of massive segments of the world's population. Most countries are on that path. There are a handful of countries like Haiti, like North Korea, like Sudan, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. These countries, often conflict-prone or high levels of corruption. You could probably talk for days on what are all the problems that has hindered Haiti's development. They have seen some progress. Lifespans have nearly doubled since about 1940, but they have had also these corruption issues in government, bad governance, lots of failings there too. So Haiti is certainly a major challenge, but again, to emphasize, it's not typical of most of the world. Now, the problem with the earthquake, that disaster, which claimed so many lives, over 200,000 people died in that earthquake. I responded to that as part of Compassion's program. I led a medical response team into Haiti just days after the quake, and we began addressing that. It's a tragedy, and it's one of those things that grieves your heart.
Yes.
Those images and experiences will never leave me. But it's not something that we shrink in defeat in front of, because it's easy for people to say, well, it was a natural disaster. Well, yes and no. Obviously, the earthquake itself is a natural phenomenon, but the disaster part actually is man-made. Mm-hmm. There was an earthquake of equal magnitude in the Los Angeles area a few years earlier, and nowhere near 200,000 people died, despite the fact that the population of that area was much higher than Port-au-Prince.
Yeah.
Why? Well,
better
rebar.
Buildings, yeah.
Rebar,
Yeah.
Simple things. So there were construction codes in Haiti, but were they followed? Was there any enforcement? Were the inspectors bribed when they came around to look and see if the building met code? Those kinds of issues. And so, again, in Haiti, Compassion has been working there for a number of years, and we've actually started seeing kids who were sponsored kids growing up in extreme poverty have now gone on to take up office in the Haiti government.
Outstanding.
And they're saying, we are blessed in order to be a blessing. We have received, and now it's time to give back. And we have been working with these kids and their families through these local churches. It's all about the local church, to help build young men and women not only of skill and capacity and knowledge, but also of integrity and godly character. And we believe that the long-term future of Haiti is in the hands of those individuals that are Haitian individuals that take up their posts, whether it's in government or in journalism or in the police force or in the military, wherever, that they are men and women of integrity with godly character. That's what we're trying to do, and we are seeing hundreds of them fill those ranks at this time in leadership positions.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the role of government, creating a good normal. Certainly, what can business do, shopping for a better world, and most importantly, how can the church end poverty? Those are a few topics on the table, and we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Scott Todd right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Scott Todd with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Hope Rising, 200 pages, published by Thomas Nelson. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore. We also have a link to the website, and of course, we are making it available if you would like to get it from our store. Any way you can get it and get it in your hands and get it in your heart are very important. And Scott, just before we run out of time, wanted to talk about what the government can do, what business can do, what can churches do. And in light of what you just talked about a minute ago with Haiti, obviously the problem with corruption is one of the reasons why sometimes government aid is not very effective, or corruption within the government, it's misused. But still, there is a role for government in creating a good normal, in really addressing this issue of extreme poverty. What is that?
Well, yeah, with very little time, the key things with the role of government, certainly about providing a secure state, ensuring private property, ensuring that the rule of law, a lot of those kinds of fundamentals. There are things that churches can't directly do, that the average citizen can't directly do. Maybe even infrastructure support, things like roads and electrification.
Sure.
Those things, you can look at the good things from U.S. history and say those are generally true. Now, they begin wading into other water with socialist kinds of approaches. You could argue about healthcare, education, things like that. Clearly, the main point is there are some things only governments can do, and they need to do them well. And so creating transparency and allowing good accountability about political leadership is the key. Now, for the U.S. citizen, since a lot of us listening in here would be Americans, that then says, well, what are we giving to, and what do we expect? Our foreign aid, a lot of people greatly overestimate how much money goes out in U.S. foreign assistance, and we should demand more of how that money is used. Oftentimes, it's just used as a geopolitical control, rather than really demanding the transparency and performance of those governments. And that's a bad thing. So as citizens, we should be better informed. We should care about how that money is given, but not just have a knee-jerk reaction of, well, there's corruption, we shouldn't give it. Because we're actually seeing lots of progress in transparency in foreign governments. And some aid is being really well used. I can think of examples from the Bush era where tremendous positive impact happened because of U.S. foreign assistance. And frankly, with the negative image the U.S. government has around the world, it's something we need to shine at. We need to demonstrate the American heart of generosity and concern, and we can do that. We have examples where that's worked well, while being savvy about the political realities of corruption that are still there.
You talk about business and shopping for a better world. Obviously, we need to be thinking about what we buy, because sometimes that can have a very significant positive effect or sometimes a negative effect in terms of this issue of extreme poverty.
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I sketch out in the book, I kind of sketch out the issue. I wish I could offer more specific guidance. Okay, what do you really do with that? How do I make a purchasing decision and keep it easy for me? Because, there's just too much in my head to make that choice between that brand and that brand. It's a tough one. Mainly, I want to highlight the fact that business is the biggest driver of economic prosperity. And so when we talk about bringing an end to extreme global poverty, yes, your act of charity or philanthropy, what you give to and support, that matters a ton. But the role of business in creating opportunity, jobs, the chance to earn an income, that's critical. And so overall economic growth being driven by business, there's a fundamental principle in business about making money and what is the consumer value in a product. And what's interesting is how you could argue that a pair of blue jeans from Walmart or from some fancy, I won't name any particular stores, but those high-end shops that sell a pair of jeans for 5 times what they should cost. Why? Well, the label on the back, and it's an image thing. So those fundamental economics about what a consumer will pay for, if we could make social value, that we would value those companies that are doing good in the world, we would value those companies that don't employ child labor, that we would value those companies who are willing to take risks like building factories and creating opportunities in these more difficult environments, and say, you know what, that brand matters to me. And there are some companies that are learning to do this, and there are possibilities, things like fair trade, which they show it's a symbol of what's possible, of how the voice of the consumer can shape the practices of business to create opportunities for the poor. That's the fundamental equation that we'd like to see influenced here.
Got some good information there about fair trade and what that means. But just before we run out of time, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the church can address this issue of extreme poverty as well.
Well, coming at that theologically, I mean, our understanding of Scripture, when Jesus was, he could have started a business. He chose to start the church. He could have started a government. He had that option. He chose to establish the church. And when he did that, what he was saying was, there's going to be this local community of believers, and my Spirit will be with them. I will empower them. And through that local fellowship, teaching the truth and declaring that faith, moving forward, they will become my agents. And when he established the church, he even said this. He said the church would prevail against the very gates of hell. So there's a theological position. That's what I want to start with, is that the church has this role to play in social transformation because that's what Jesus wanted. That's how he started the whole thing. The second, then, is more practically, any atheist could look at the horsepower of 2 billion people around the world who claim to believe Jesus was the Son of God, and a scriptural text that they adhere to that's loaded with commands to care for the poor, and then look at those millions of local outposts of local congregations and churches everywhere in the world, and say, wow, there's a group of people located in the very places we need to reach whose faith compels them to engage in ministry for the poor. And with all of that horsepower and all of that presence, surely their involvement in this is critical to success, if you will. And that's what we see all around the world with compassion. We see local churches living out their faith, demonstrating the love of God, not just declaring a gospel, not just a gospel of words, but a gospel of muscles, not just evangelism, but the full package of the gospel, which is words and deeds. And the evidence of the authenticity of God's love made real by that local fellowship has not only the power to advance the kingdom, which is what we're commissioned to do, and at the same time to actually make a difference. And we see that around the world. So of those three, the church, government, and business, I would say it is the church that creates the fundamental environment, because it's only through the message of faith where you believe in a better future, where the true source of hope is anchored, where why would I respect another person and hope for their better future? Well, it's the love of God flowing through me. I don't have time, obviously, to go into all the depth of it, but it's those teachings of the faith and the presence of that fellowship in that community that has the greatest horsepower, along with the promise, I think, of Scripture to overcome the gates of hell. Surely poverty is a tackleable issue.
Again, we've tried to give you a little bit of an overview in this hour of a book that has over 200 pages, but we've certainly given you some of the vision and even a plan, but now it comes down to courage. Do you have the courage to act on this? Do you believe in a gospel of muscle, or do you simply believe in the platitudes and words that so often accompany this conversation? And Scott, Todd, I appreciate the dedication you have to this, the very articulate way in which you express this, and I thank you so very much for writing the book and joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby, for your partnership and helping getting the encouraging message out there about the progress that we're seeing, and just for all that you're doing to move us all forward in our thinking and in our understanding of the relevant issues of our day.
I plan to do a commentary on this. A lot of great material in this book. We've covered as much as we possibly can. But again, Scott, thank you, and maybe we can do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Kerby.
Let's, if just before we run out of time here, mention all the resources that we have for you. First hour today, we spent a little bit of time talking about sexual purity and abstinence, and that information is still available. The True Love Project, and we have a video, we have an article about it, and we have a web link. Second hour today, we talked about Hope Rising, how Christians can end extreme poverty in this generation. Once again, we have a book review as well as a link to the website and a video, and so we are now putting in your hands some resources so that you can make a difference on these two very important issues that we believe are important for Christians to have a voice in and to articulate to the watching world. So let me encourage you to visit our website to find some of the books and resources and DVDs and videos that we are making available. As you go there, I hope that you might also remember that we are a listener-supported program, and so if you can help us out financially, just ask yourself again, where do you hear these kinds of conversations on other programs and other venues? And maybe you'll see the value of what we are doing here, and if you do value what we do, we would certainly love to hear from you. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, click on that donate button. Of course, you can write to us as well, but let's encourage you to get involved in one way or another. Andrew, Catherine, and Gerald, we thank you so very much for your involvement today. We thank you for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.